I like to think that to some degree, we all fear the ocean. It's not just the fear of the unknown, the fact that we have no idea what's out there because it's so vast and inhospitable. It's not just the fear of imminent death through drowning or crushing, with only the oxygen in your tank or the hull of your vessel protecting you. For me, at least, it's the helplessness. We don't belong in the water. We can't breathe down there, we can barely move, much less defend ourselves. And in some places, either due to particles in the water or due to darkness, we can barely see 20 feet in front of ourselves, and can't tell at all what's above us, below us, or behind us. My point is, it's scary down there, and Subnautica was the first game that really made me realize just how afraid I was of the deep, dark ocean. Subnautica Below Zero continues that trend, but not quite to the same degree. In this review, I'd like to explain what I liked, what I didn't like about Below Zero, and then dive into a comparison between the first and second game, and whether Below Zero is a worthy successor or not. In Subnautica Below Zero, you drop down onto the same ocean world as the first game in an effort to find out what happened to your sister. But this time it takes you to an Arctic region, giving us new biomes and a new mechanic in the form of temperature to watch out for. It is a game focused on exploring rather than combat, where every new discovery allows you to progress the story, unlock new convenient technologies, or just learn a little more about the world you're in. The main threats you'll encounter take the form of environmental dangers, such as active volcanic vents, extreme depths, and dangerous wildlife that will attempt to eat you and your boat. It is a very pretty game, and no matter how afraid I was of running into that thing that keeps screeching in the distance, I kept feeling tempted to go a little further than my last venture away from my carefully constructed base, if only to see what I'd find next. There was also a new emphasis on exploring surface areas, with entire new biomes on land opening up to the player at different parts of the story. Granted, they're not quite as interesting as the underwater areas, but that was to be expected. I still found them a nice change of pace from the claustrophobia of my submarine. It's important to point out it's not a challenging game. The main challenge is playing memory games to figure out where you've already gone and where you haven't. That is, of course, unless you suffer from thalassophobia like me, in which case you might struggle to dive into some of the deeper, darker parts of the world. However, once you overcome your fears, you'll soon realize the depths aren't really that bad. Okay, maybe they are, but that's how you progress, and I wasn't raised to be a quitter. The main appeal of the game is definitely the exploration aspect. Going a little deeper and a little further every time is where the game really shines. It's incredibly satisfying to find something new and unexpected on the ocean floor or in the caverns. And it kept me engaged all the way through the game. The survival aspects kind of serve as more of a side note to the exploration part. Bringing enough supplies for every trip out of your base is paramount, but once I had a relatively modest base setup, I never felt like I was in any threat of starvation or dying of thirst. It's not as pressing as some other survival games. As for the combat system, it is rough. And while I certainly felt like the sea creatures were a threat, the issue is that certain things in the game might take you out of the immersion. For instance, one of the land predators can be easily killed with a knife because its turning speed is so slow that you can just stab it in the butt all day, and as long as you keep turning, it will never be able to catch you. A lot of the human or car-sized predators are just not a threat to your submarine, the sea truck, because, well, you can literally just run them over and they'll die instantly. Even if their attacks connect, they only do a little bit of damage, and it's relatively easy to do repairs. The larger creatures, the leviathans, are a major threat, but you can beat them. But beating them mostly just involves going into the prawn suit with a drill and grappling hook, hooking onto the side of the big fish, and then just riding out the rodeo while continuously drilling into its side. It's quirky and that makes it kind of fun, but it's pretty clear this wasn't the intended way to deal with them, as it gets pretty tiresome to do this a few times in a row. So now that we've got a good impression of how Below Zero performs overall, how would I argue it stacks up against its predecessor? Well, honestly, pretty well. I would say most parts of the original game have been improved. Base building is a little smoother, advancing in technology happens in leaps rather than in small increments, and I think the Sea Truck is a better vehicle than either the Sea Moth or the Cyclops from the original game, as the Sea Truck without any modules basically functions identically to the Sea Moth, while the Cyclops always felt like it was kind of too much for the scale of either the first game or the second one, being too large to be taken into most locations, and therefore often ending up being left far behind as you explore. The Sea Truck is a nice in-between that you can take into all areas of the map and provides a ton of useful functions depending on the modules you've decided to attach to it. I do have a few complaints. I don't think the predators of the new game were as varied as the ones in the old game were. There weren't really any enemies like ampules, crab squids, or warpers around, and I think that hurt the experience as a whole. Having to use different approaches to deal with different areas' predators would have made the exploration in this game far more exciting. Whereas right now the approach was just run everything over with your Sea Truck or just run away from it. As a result, the game also became a lot less scary than the first Subnautica. In the first Subnautica, nearly every biome had its own unique predators with their own unique abilities. I'll never forget the first time I ran into a mesmer, or tried to get one of my vehicles into the lava zone only to find all the power being drained by the lava slugs that live there. But because the new game doesn't have quite that same variety, you don't become as wary of new areas as you would be in the first games, because after exploring most of the game, I began to feel like I had already seen all the types of predators that the game had to offer, and I was no longer afraid to keep diving deeper because I already felt like I knew what to expect. Similarly, I don't think the biomes were overall as inspired as they were in the first game. There were a few areas I thought were really good looking, like the twisty bridges or the deeper crystal caves, but I didn't feel like these biomes captured my imagination as much as the Blood Kelp Ravine, the Lost River, or the Grand Reef did in the first game. I'd argue Below Zero is a worthy successor, but I urge the development team to continue using their imagination to create even more varied environments, fauna, and flora in a potential third Subnautica game. Now, let's talk about some of the bullet points. Subnautica Below Zero is a very pretty game, but it's definitely not a AAA experience. A lot of little improvements could go a long way in making the game even prettier. There are particle effects, making more of the plant life move organically in the water, more elaborate textures for things like the ocean floor or caverns, stuff like that. Though I think the graphics are perfectly serviceable as is. They are nowhere near an eyesore, and that's very important for an exploration game. Audio is one of the areas the game massively improved upon compared to its predecessor. There's far more voice acting, and it's much better than what was featured in the first game. Therefore, we can safely say it made a big leap forward in this regard. Below Zero is a great exploration game with survival elements, but you need to enjoy exploration games to enjoy Below Zero. If it's not your thing, you won't find much else about the game enjoyable, as the survival elements are too basic to challenge people who love the survival genre, and the combat system is both too clunky and too basic. Below Zero has a great story to tell, but it's a slow burn. You get bits and pieces as you discover different story elements, locations or voice recordings, but we'll spend most of the game not engaging with it directly. The voice acting is done pretty well, and I enjoyed the interactions with the other characters you meet along the way, but one complaint I did have was that I felt like I did some parts of the story out of order, and it made some of the story beats not hit as well as they otherwise would have. This is kind of inevitable with an open world game, but it's a criticism that stands nonetheless. So, what's my final conclusion for Subnautica Below Zero? I give the game a solid 4 out of 5. It's a very well done exploration game with plenty to do and plenty to see to entertain you for at least 15 to 20 hours, and it's a solid improvement on the first game. However, the focus of the game is definitely on the exploration aspect, with the other gameplay elements just acting as supporting pillars for exploration. As a result, you need to be able to enjoy the game where the focus is on exploration. If you're looking for a challenging survival game or a game with deep and engaging combat, you won't find it here. Thank you for watching my review of Subnautica Below Zero. If you'd like to help my channel grow, please give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. If you want to go even further to support me in making more videos, I also have a Patreon set up, link is in the description below. See you all in my next video.